Years ago, when I was a new teacher, I was full of energy and passion for my work. Back in those days, I was healthy and eager to prove myself. I had just arrived at an opt-in school, an old daytime school, and to get there on time, I had to leave home 2 or 3 hours early. It was a long journey, but my dedication never allowed me to feel tired. I was deeply committed to my job. As a primary school teacher, I taught both boys and girls together, and I truly enjoyed working with the children. Over time, I became comfortable with them, and they, in turn, became comfortable with me. At that time, I was unmarried and still living with my parents. It was the middle of the school year. One day, while I was teaching the kids, the principal entered the classroom. He was accompanied by a child who looked to be a little over 7 years old. The principal turned to the class and said, "Kids, this boy's name is Denis. He just moved here from another school. He recently lost his father, so please be kind to him." Then he gestured for the boy to take a seat. Although he was just a child, I couldn't explain why I felt an overwhelming sense of unease about him. But I didn't let it show. Instead, I smiled warmly and said, "Go ahead, Denis. Sit down with the others." He gave me a cold, unreadable look before silently walking past me and taking a seat. The principal left, and I resumed teaching. Denis sat at the back of the classroom, but throughout the lesson, he kept his gaze locked on me with an unsettling, mysterious turquoise stare. No matter how much I tried to avoid it, I couldn't escape the intensity of his eyes. His eyes never left me. Feeling uneasy under his intense stare, I finally called him forward. "Denis, come to the board," I said. But he didn't react. He just sat there, unmoving. I repeated myself, "I'm talking to you. Come to the board." Slowly, he stood up and walked toward the board, his gaze locked onto me as if he were studying me, or something far beyond me. There was something unsettling about the way he moved, almost deliberate, almost unnatural. I asked, "How many alphabets do you know?" He didn't answer. Instead, he simply picked up the chalk and began writing on the board. He traced the letter A with slow, deliberate strokes, as if carving it into the surface rather than writing. Something about it felt strange. He knew the letters. He knew all of them. But what unsettled me was his handwriting. It didn't resemble a child's at all. There was no clumsiness, no uneven lines like other children his age. Instead, his handwriting was smooth, calculated, almost too perfect, as if it belonged to an adult. I hesitated before asking, "What did you learn at your previous school?" He turned his head, met my gaze, and simply said, "Nothing." And then he just stared, asked, "What's 3 for 2?" And he wrote 5 on the board with precision. Then, without a word, he started writing larger numbers. To my shock, I saw symbols like cross and divide, and he was writing things that made no sense. I couldn't help but feel more unsettled. This was a first grader who shouldn't even know such things. I asked again, "Where did you learn these?" But once again, no answer. I couldn't understand why he wouldn't speak. I didn't push the matter too much. Maybe his silence was due to the grief from losing his father. I'd better not press him, I thought to myself. Finally, I said, "Go sit down." He quietly returned to the back of the classroom and took his seat. His gaze never left me. When the bell rang, signaling the end of class, we headed to the office. I asked the principal, "Why isn't this student talking?" The principal looked at me, puzzled, and said, "I don't know if he's mute or just silent." I laughed nervously and replied, "Strange, right?" He had written things today that even high school students wouldn't know. The principal, trying to make sense of it, said, "Does that mean he's an elite?" I shook my head. It's more strange than elite. As I looked out the window, I caught a glimpse of him sitting in the schoolyard, staring at me. I took a deep breath and went on my break, but my mind was spinning. Why wouldn't he take his eyes off me? I was growing weary. When the class bell rang, I returned to the classroom. Denis was still sitting in the back, his eyes fixed on mine. I couldn't help but feel trapped by his gaze. I said, "Get up and go replace your seat." I wanted to change his angle, move him to a different spot, maybe so he wouldn't look at me so directly. but something told me he wasn't done watching me, but it was useless. I thought to myself, damn, this kid's something else. I approached him and asked, why do you keep staring at me so much? When I'm teaching, you need to look at the book or the board. Stop zooming in on me, okay? He lowered his head without saying a word. I stood there for a moment wondering, is that all? He was still like that until the last bell rang. But there was a frown on his face, an expression that made him look almost psychotic. Unfortunately, the class ended and I had no more time to send him anywhere. I had to endure it. Every day, I would head to town with Peterson, one of my colleagues, after school, but that day I waited for him to arrive much longer than usual. For the first time, Peterson was late. He finally showed up an hour later, looking like he'd been through some kind of trouble. I quickly left with him and went home, but even then I couldn't shake the thought of that strange boy. When I got home, my mother asked, "Why do you seem so off today?" "A new kid joined the class," I replied. She raised an eyebrow. "Is something wrong? Did his behavior annoy you?" I hesitated for a moment and said, "I didn't like the way he looked at me." "It's all so cruel." My mother responded, "Don't say that, dear. They're just children. Innocent, not sinful." I shook my head. "But Mom, this isn't like the other kids. He doesn't act like them. He looked like someone bigger. He wrote things in class today that even I, a teacher, didn't know." My mother laughed. "Oh, honey, what are you talking about?" She didn't believe me. If I were in her shoes, I probably wouldn't have believed it either. The next day, when I arrived at school, I didn't feel well. The children were full of energy, excited for class, but Denis was different this time. He sat with his head down, staring at the floor. Even as I taught and wrote on the board, his gaze remained locked on the ground. There was a deep, terrible sadness in his eyes, something I couldn't quite place, but it was enough to make me feel uneasy. I walked over to him, frustration bubbling up inside me, and snapped, "Why are you looking at the ground all the time? Don't you see I'm teaching? Either you're all cruel to me or you're all down." He lifted his head slowly, glaring at me with a terrifying look in his eyes. I froze, my heart racing, panic seizing me. His eyes were bloodshot red. I tried desperately to look away, but his gaze kept pulling me in. I stammered, Let's put your notebook on the table and paint." Everyone else started drawing, but he didn't join them in the same way. Instead, he began sketching something strange in his notebook. They were all supposed to take their drawings up to the front, so I could review them and give them a grade. But that day, Peterson was late again, and I didn't get home until the evening. I wasn't hungry. I barely ate a few bites and muttered, "I'm tired, Mom. I'll sleep for a while. Wake me up later." I went to my room, my body heavy with exhaustion. As soon as I lay my head on the pillow, I fell into a deep sleep. But deep down, I wished I hadn't slept at all. I slept, but it wasn't peaceful. I was thrust into a horrifying scene. A woman in a black dress, her hair a tangled mess, her face covered in horrifying pink as blood sprayed across her. She screamed, and I watched in terror. I jolted awake, my scream piercing the silence. My mom rushed to my side. "You had a bad dream." I wiped the sweat from my brow, still trembling, and whispered, "It was a terrible dream." I sat up and glanced out the window. It was getting dark. I couldn't shake the feeling. Was it my mind playing tricks, or had I been thinking badly about that kid? Had my fears manifested in my dreams? I walked out of the room, splashed water on my face, trying to shake off the unease. I watched a movie and had dinner when Dad finally came home. But even as I ate, I couldn't forget. I remembered the kids' drawing sheets still sitting on my desk at home, untouched. I thought, I'd better go look at the paintings and try to change my mood. So I went into my room and began looking through the kids' drawings. What beautiful paintings they had made. I found myself smiling, enjoying the creativity, when suddenly I came across an unnamed sheet hidden among the others. Oh my God. I stared at it, my heart racing. It was a strange, unsettling painting. There was a woman dressed in a black dress, her hair a wild, messy pink with a few scratches across her face. It was exactly what I had dreamed. I could hardly believe it. Even the details were the same. It was the same woman I had woken up dreading. Every single feature was identical. My heart raced in my chest, and my breath seemed to stop altogether. I wanted to see who had painted this, but the sheet had no name. I quickly glanced at the names of the other kids, but they were all there except for Denis. A chill ran through me. I was certain this painting was meant to be a secret. I wondered for a moment, was this child real, or was this just something my mind had conjured? Who was it that had filled me with so much negative energy? A child, or someone normal, someone who didn't seem quite right. I grabbed the painting and hurried to my mom. "Mom, look at this painting." My mother took the painting from me, her face unreadable as she examined it. Then she turned to me, a concerned look crossing her face. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft. I nodded quickly, but the confusion lingered. "Is that white?" I looked back at the painting in a daze. "What?" I blinked, and the painting was gone. In its place was a blank white sheet. It was impossible. I had seen it with my own eyes. I wasn't wrong. I stared at my mother in disbelief. "Look, Mom. I think I've got the wrong paper." I muttered, but panic was slowly starting to take over. I rushed back to the room, frantically searching for the painting, tearing through everything in my path. What happened to it? I was going crazy, scouring every inch of the room, flipping through papers and moving objects. But it was gone. My mother called from the door. "Little one, do you want us to go to a doctor tomorrow?" Her voice was filled with concern. "I think you're tired these days." Her words were like ice. I spun around, fury bubbling inside me. "Am I crazy?" I snapped. "I'm not lying to God. The painting had been right here. I swore it. If you don't believe me, come look," I shouted. There was nothing, no strange, terrifying image, just a blank space, and the other drawings were there. But something caught my eye. I turned to look at the leaflets, and there it was, a simple, innocent children's drawing. A few houses, mountains, and a name written across the top, Denis. I swear that drawing wasn't there before. I could feel my heart racing. "Look, what a lovely drawing little Denis has made," my mother chuckled. She smiled as she showed it to me. "What do you think about this one?" I was losing my mind. My mother didn't believe me. I tried to reason with myself, thinking, I'm not making this up. But it didn't help. That night I lay awake, my mind consumed with the mystery of the horror painting and the nightmare I'd seen. I couldn't sleep. The terror clung to me like a shadow, pressing down on me until late. The next morning I went back to school. Everyone was already in class, except for Denis. I felt a strange unease in the pit of my stomach. "Where is he?" I asked. One of the other children stood up and replied, "The lady didn't let him come today. I don't know why." I didn't know what to think of it. Part of me felt a strange relief. "That's okay," I muttered, but it didn't feel okay. I handed out the children's drawings, and my eyes immediately went to the ones by Denis. They weren't there. The others had their drawings, simple, colorful, innocent, but Denis' work was completely missing. My heart dropped. The devil. I couldn't even begin to process it. Where were his drawings? What was happening? I didn't like to do that at all, but since I had a deal with the principal, I agreed. I finished my class earlier that day and asked one of the kids named Mark to come along and show me Denis' home. No one had ever been to Denis' house until that day, and no one knew what was inside. Mark showed me an old house and said, it used to be the house of Denis' grandfather. Many years ago he dead, and no one lives there anymore. But since the day Denis and her mother arrived to our town, they've been live here. I asked, "Have you ever been to the Denis' home?" He said, "No, not much. His mother is mean and doesn't like guests." I thought he wouldn't mind me going alone. For a moment, I considered turning back, but I had promised the principal. I thanked Mark and said, "You go, I'll take it from here." Mark left, and I walked toward Denis's home. I didn't feel good about it. Their house was far from the others, old and worn out. There was a wooden door. The door wasn't closed and opened with a horrible, creaking sound as I pushed it. I stepped inside. It was a large, eerie house, almost predatory in its silence. There was someone inside. The trash and debris scattered around the room were overwhelming. A voice was singing. In the corner of the room, there was a large black dog. The dog didn't bark when it saw me, but it growled angrily, showing its teeth. I was thankful it was chained up, or it would have attacked me in a few seconds. I moved a little further into the house. I called out, "Mrs., is anyone home?" There was no answer. The atmosphere in the house was terrifying. I could almost hear the silence yelling at me to leave quickly. I hesitated for a moment. Behind me, there was an eerie stillness. For a second, I felt the shadow of something lurking nearby. At first, I asked myself, "What about you? Are you curious?" But then, curiosity pushed me to stay. I took a few more steps toward the secluded room. I felt uneasy. I thought to myself, this is far from the rest of the town. If something happens to me, no one will know. I should probably turn back. But as soon as I decided to leave, I heard a loud sound coming from the room. It felt like something was accusing me from inside. Please, let it be a cat, or a bird, or something harmless. I wanted to stop and leave, but my feet carried me closer. I took a few more steps and saw the same large black dog spreading garbage around the room. It looked exactly like the one from the locked room. I thought it couldn't be the same, but how could it not be? The dog gave me a chilling look and let out a low growl. Fear surged through me, and I quickly backed away from the room. Just as I was about to turn toward the door, I suddenly heard a woman's voice say, "Mister." "Well, did you need something?" I turned my head and saw a woman standing there. We exchanged a smile. Her look made me feel uneasy. I couldn't help but smile and ask, "Are you Denis's mother?" She laughed and replied, "Yes, I'm his mother." Her smile revealed broken black teeth near the top. I told her that Denis hadn't been to school for days, and I came to check on him. I asked, "Is he okay?" She laughed again and said, "He's at home. He's not feeling well." "I'm upset with someone," she added, then gave me a chilling look. It felt as if she were mocking me. I asked, "Is he awake now? Can I see him?" "Yeah, come in," she said. I had a bad feeling. I didn't like Denis, nor his mother, nor their house. I stepped inside and walked further in. The inside of the house was colder than outside. The smell of something foul filled the entire space. I was in a state of confusion. I thought to myself, what am I doing here? It was strange to me how they could live in such a space. I moved a little further. I saw Denis sitting upright, drawing something. I smiled and said, "Is it a secret, Denis? Are you okay, son?" He gave me a furious look. Without answering, he lowered his head and continued drawing. Suddenly, the fountain fell on his drawing, and I froze. There were a few sheets by his hand, and I saw that each one had terrifying paintings, just like the one he had drawn before. One by one, they were even more terrifying. I reached out to pick up the papers when Denis suddenly shot me a look, even more terrifying than before. I held my hand to keep it from trembling. I was so scared. I felt like I wasn't dealing with a human being anymore. With trembling fear, I asked, "Why didn't you come to school? We were worried about you. Everyone missed you." Without answering, he crumpled the paper and got up, walking away. I waited for a little while for Denis's mother to return. It felt like an eternity. I said, "Ma'am, don't bring anything. I had tea at school. I just came to see Denis for a minute. Don't bother." I waited a few moments, but there was no response. Since I was already there, I didn't want to stay longer. I wasn't feeling well, and I just wanted to leave. I got up from my seat and I walked outside and went a little further. There was no one in the house. I looked into the kitchen, hoping to find Denis' mother, but there was no one there. I called out, "Denis, where did you go?" There was no answer. I called again, but still no voice. I felt stuck and decided to explore the house. I entered a room, but there was no one there. I also checked the kitchen, but it was useless. Then I suddenly noticed something strange. There was a trail of blood at the bottom of the door. I screamed and took a few deep breaths to calm myself. With fear gripping me, I slowly walked toward the door. I pulled the handle and opened it, revealing something no one would ever want to see. It was a black dog's carcass, the same kind I had seen in the yard in Solitude. Its severed head was turned towards the doorway, and its eyes were still open. It felt as though Denis and his mother were still watching me. I screamed and rushed out of the kitchen, my whole body trembling. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I wanted to leave the house, but when I reached the door, I found it locked. I pounded on the door, screaming for help, but my voice didn't carry. I was about to fall to my knees and scream louder, but I didn't know what to do. I saw a stick nearby and quickly grabbed it, breaking a small piece of the glass. Flies swarmed around the bars, and I couldn't get out myself. I continued breaking the glass, hoping someone would hear me. I screamed and shouted, but it didn't help. Then suddenly, I felt someone approaching from behind. I turned around, and it was Denis's mother, coming closer. She looked just like the figure Denis had drawn. A horrifying woman with a twisted face covered in scratches. She smiled as she approached. My legs went weak, and I collapsed to the floor by the door. In a trembling voice, I said, "Let me go," but she didn't hear me. She just smiled. A cruel, nasty smile. She came closer and sat down in front of me, her hand reaching up to my face. Her hands were burning hot, and the heat of them made my face feel numb. From the warmth of her touch, a strange feeling flowed into me. I was dying of fear. Suddenly, I heard a sound outside. She got up and looked out. I knew the door was open, and whoever had knocked was now coming in. Denis' mother looked at me, then held her hand a few centimeters from my face. No matter how much I shouted or screamed, nothing could stop her. I felt paralyzed. She didn't pull her hand away with any force, but it felt like she was holding me in place. From behind the glass door, I saw the school principal approach. I wanted to tell him that I was trapped in the house, but the woman wouldn't let me speak. I could hear the school principal calling out, "It's a Denis home? I want to talk to Mr. Adam. Is he here? Is anyone here?" I could see him from inside the house, but he couldn't see me, as the space was large and he was heading toward the back of the house. I struggled to breathe, feeling suffocated. It didn't matter anymore if the principal found me. I just wanted to escape. He was still walking through the yard, unaware of the horror unfolding inside. He was as shocked as I was by the sight of the filthy house. My vision was fading, and I felt as though I was breathing my last. I had no hope left. I couldn't fight for my life anymore. My hands and feet felt lifeless. Just as I lost all hope, I saw someone behind her. A large tea kettle was thrown at the woman's head. As soon as I exhaled, the woman fell to the ground. My vision blurred, and I could barely catch my breath. But I felt a little relief amidst the confusion. In disbelief, I saw Denis holding a knife above her mother's head. It became clear to me that the person who had attacked her was Denis. There was no longer the anger or coldness I had always seen on Denis's face. It had completely changed. Someone else was standing there. I didn't have the strength to speak. I closed my eyes and smiled, silently thanking Denis. I whispered, "Open the door. Go tell the principal I'm here." Denis picked up the keys and opened the door. He ran toward the yard, shouting, "My teacher is here."